The first thing I noticed was his hands. He was standing near the front desk at Harwick Logistics Group, holding a folded piece of paper against his chest, and his left thumb was tracing a small circle against his pant leg. The same motion my brother used when he was waiting somewhere loud and nobody was looking at him. The receptionist, Dana, had her back turned. The two account managers by the elevator were mid-conversation. Nobody was looking at the old man at all. The lobby smelled like floor wax and the coffee cart near the south entrance. I was crossing the lobby with a stack of reprinted shipping manifests under my arm, already running 4 minutes behind to drop them at Renata's assistant's desk, and I should have kept walking. Instead, I set the manifests on the edge of the nearest chair, raised one hand and signed, "Hello. Can I help you find someone?" He looked up. Something in his face shifted, not surprise exactly, more like the particular relief of a door opening that you'd already stopped expecting to open. He signed back, fluid and quick, and I caught maybe 70% of it, enough to understand he had a 9 o'clock appointment with a name I didn't recognize on the 14th floor. I pointed toward the elevator bank, then signed the floor number and the direction of the reception desk up there. He nodded and smiled, and his left thumb stopped its small circle. His eyes held mine for a moment, steady, clear, the kind of look that didn't need translation. I picked up my manifests and went to deliver them. The whole thing had taken less than 90 seconds. I didn't think about it again until Tuesday, 11:14 a.m., when everything changed. My name is Cora Vásquez. I was 23 years old and 4 weeks into a 12-week marketing internship at Harwick Logistics Group in Columbus, Ohio, when that morning happened. Harwick was a mid-size regional freight company. Not glamorous, not a household name, exactly the kind of place a marketing degree from a state school lands you for the summer if you don't have connections, which I didn't. I'd moved to Columbus with 2 suitcases and a laptop with a cracked screen protector, into a studio apartment near Clintonville that I'd signed the lease on over the phone without seeing it first. The place was fine, small, clean, a window that faced a parking lot. The internship paid $1,850 a month before taxes, which covered rent and not much else. My parents helped with groceries when they could. I had learned American Sign Language the way most people learn a second language that actually matters to them. Necessity first, fluency second. My brother Tomas was born with moderate to severe hearing loss, diagnosed late, mainstreamed into a hearing school system that never quite fit him. I was 9 when our parents enrolled us both in a community ASL course. Tomas took to it immediately. I was slower, clumsier, but I kept going. Saturday classes, library workbooks, a spiral-bound reference binder from a children's ASL series that Tomas annotated in the margins with corrections and shortcuts in blue ballpoint pen. He gave it to me the week I started practicing full sentences. "You need it more than I do right now," he signed. "You're still thinking in English." I still had that binder. It lived in my bag. Tomas was 19 then, working part-time at a veterinary clinic where the staff had learned to sign with him within his first month. He was better at building those bridges than I was, patient in a way I had to practice at, fluent in a way that looked effortless because he'd earned it in the hardest possible classroom. I wanted to keep up with him. That was the real reason I never stopped practicing. By the time I was in college, I was conversational. Not perfect. I dropped tense markers when I moved fast, and my finger spelling got sloppy if I was nervous. But I could hold a real conversation, and I could read one, and in a lobby full of people who hadn't looked at the old man once, that was enough. What I didn't know about Harwick Logistics Group in those first 4 weeks was that the company had been family-founded. That the original founder had stepped back from day-to-day operations 7 years earlier, retaining the title of CEO Emeritus and a seat on the board. That he made unannounced visits to the Columbus branch office roughly 4 times a year, usually arriving at the front desk without a scheduled appointment visible to anyone below the executive floor, specifically to see what the company looked like when it didn't know he was watching. I didn't know any of that. I just saw a man whose thumb wouldn't stop moving. My official title was marketing intern. My actual function during those first 4 weeks was closer to marketing department utility infrastructure. I had come into the internship expecting projects, campaign briefs, maybe some content work, the kind of tasks that end up in a portfolio. What I found instead was a department running at capacity with no interest in explaining its systems to someone who would be gone by August. So I learned by absorption. I watched how the workflow moved and I filled the gaps I could reach. There were recurring tasks that had no clear owner. A weekly vendor communication summary that someone had apparently been compiling and distributing for years, author unknown, now structurally orphaned because the person who'd last owned it had moved to a different team. I found the template on a shared drive, figured out the format, started producing it. Nobody asked me to. Nobody commented when I did. The distribution list kept receiving it. There were presentations that needed reformatting before they went to clients. Not the content work, just the cosmetic alignment, the logo sizing, the slide numbering that never matched the table of contents. I did that too. I stayed until the cleaning crew came through twice in my first 2 weeks. I ate lunch at my desk and used the hour to cross-reference freight routing data for a project that technically belonged to a different team, because someone had left a note on the shared drive asking if anyone had time and nobody else had responded. I reorganized the client contact spreadsheet that 3 different people maintained in 3 different formats, merging them into one clean version and sending it to all 3 without commentary. I proofread outgoing client emails for a senior account manager who never asked me to but who had a recurring issue with transposing digits in freight weights, 4,200 pounds becoming 2,400 pounds, the kind of error that costs real money downstream. He never noticed I was catching them. The errors stopped. The thing about that kind of work is that it disappears. It doesn't accumulate visibly. A presentation that has correct slide numbers doesn't announce that it was broken before I fixed it. A distribution list that keeps receiving its weekly summary doesn't flag that the person producing it had no formal mandate to do so. The work I was doing was the kind that only becomes visible when it stops, when the summary doesn't appear 1 week and someone finally has to ask where it went. I understood that. I wasn't doing it for credit. I was doing it because the gaps were there and I could see them, and I don't have the instinct to walk past an open gap. The work was there. Someone had to hold it. Tomas used to say the same thing about me. You can't leave a door ajar, Cora. He'd sign it with a half-smile. Physically incapable. What I was not doing, in those 4 weeks, was making myself visible in the ways that the internship structure rewarded. I wasn't in Renata's sightline. I wasn't contributing to the team meetings where she could measure me. I was in the margins, doing the margin work, and in a department run by someone who assessed value by what she could see and report upward. Invisible was indistinguishable from absent. Renata Cho called me into her office at 2:30 on the same Tuesday I'd signed with the old man in the lobby. Her office was a glass-walled rectangle on the 3rd floor, overlooking the open-plan work area. She was already seated when I knocked, a single manila folder open in front of her, which I later understood to be entirely performative. "Close the door," she said. I closed it and sat in the chair across from her without being invited to. That part one remember clearly. The decision to sit rather than stand, not as a choice I deliberated, just as something my body did before my mind caught up. "I heard about this morning," she said. "The lobby." "Okay," I said. "You left your work to go help a visitor." "I was crossing the lobby," I said. He was standing at the front desk and no one was helping him. It took about 2 minutes. "That's not really the point," Renata said, with the patient voice of someone explaining something to a child they've given up on. "Your responsibility during work hours is to the team, not to strangers in the lobby. That's what we have front desk staff for." "The front desk staff wasn't looking at him," I said. Something shifted in her expression, not anger, not yet. A recalibration. "Dana handles visitors," she said. "That's her job. When you step in, you're implying she can't do it." I didn't say anything. "What you did reflects on the department," she said. "I need interns who understand professional boundaries." I waited. "And the vendor summary," she said, leaning forward slightly. "Nobody asked you to take that on. You just decided it was yours." "It wasn't being produced," I said. The distribution list was still active. People were waiting for it. "That's not your call to make," she said. "You've been here 4 weeks. You don't know the history of every process in this building." I looked at the window behind her. The parking lot, a delivery truck backing into a loading bay, its reverse lights blinking in the gray afternoon. "And the routing data," she continued. Marcus's project. You spent your lunch hour on it. Someone posted asking for help, I said. Someone posted asking for help from the team, Renata said. You're not on the team, Cora. You're a summer intern. There's a difference. Something went flat in my chest, not hurt, not quite, just a specific kind of recognition. The kind that comes when a thing you'd half suspected reveals its actual shape. I sat with it for a moment. I let the shape be what it was. He was trying to communicate with someone and no one could, I said. I could. Cora. She said my name the way people say enough. You're not here to freelance. You're here to support the team. That's the arrangement. She closed the folder, though it had never been opened to any particular page. I'd like you to think about whether this is the right fit for you. Are you ending my internship? I asked. She straightened a pen on her desk. I'm not ending anything, she said. I'm having a conversation about expectations. About what it means to respect the structure you've been placed inside. I'm asking you to reflect, she said, with bureaucratic warmth that left every door technically open and all of them functionally closed. This kind of thing, going off on your own, not checking in, deciding you know better than the structure around you, it's a pattern I've noticed. Frankly, it's a little ungrateful. You were given an opportunity here. A silence settled between us. I looked at the closed folder on her desk. I'll think about what you said, I told her. She nodded, as if she'd accomplished something, and I stood, and I left without raising my voice, without any theatrical pause at the door, without any of the things I might have wanted to do. I went back to my desk. I sat down. I opened the vendor summary template. I kept working. I printed a revised version of the vendor summary and set it in the distribution tray. I refilled the paper in the printer on my floor because it was empty and someone would need it before end of day. I answered 3 emails, 1 about slide formatting, 2 about meeting logistics for a Friday client call. I drank the rest of a coffee that had gone cold. I organized the physical files on my desk into 2 stacks, things with deadlines this week and things with deadlines after. I walked to the break room and filled my water bottle. The 3rd floor had mostly cleared out by 4:30. I checked that my badge was in my bag. I opened the reference binder to the section on formal address signs and reviewed a sequence I still sometimes mixed up under pressure. I closed the binder and set it on top of my bag. At 4:47 p.m., an email arrived from an address I didn't recognize. Executive floor domain, no department marker, just an extension number and a name, W. Holt. The subject line said only, "A few minutes of your time if you're available." I read it twice. I stood up. I took the elevator to the 14th floor. Warren Holt was shorter than I remembered from the lobby, or maybe the executive conference room made everything smaller by contrast, all glass and pale wood and a view of the Columbus skyline going gold in the afternoon light. He was sitting at the near end of the table, not the head. A woman sat 2 seats away with a legal pad. A man in his 40s stood near. The window, David Merrick, the sitting CEO. Warren stood when I came in and offered his hand. With his free hand he signed, "Thank you for coming up." I signed back, "Of course. I'm glad you found what you needed this morning." He gestured toward the chair across from his. We sat. "My assistant tells me you're in your 4th week," David Merrick said from the window. He hadn't moved toward the table yet. "Yes," I said. "Marketing intern," he said. "Yes." Warren took a tablet from the portfolio in front of him. He navigated to something and laid the screen flat on the table between us. It was an org chart, Harwick's full organizational structure, with one position highlighted. The title next to the highlight read, Community Liaison and Accessibility Coordinator, Marketing Division, Proposed. Beneath it, a salary figure, $67,400. I looked at the screen for a moment. Then I looked up at Warren. He signed slowly and clearly, "We don't have anyone who does this. We should. We've needed someone for 3 years. I didn't know how to find them until this morning. Mr. Holt has been advocating for this role since before my tenure," David Merrick said, pulling out a chair. "We weren't sure how to define it operationally. This morning gave us clarity. I said, I'm an intern. You were, David said. The woman with the legal pad looked up. He wants to know if you'd be willing to start the conversation. Not a commitment. Just a conversation. Something moved in my hands. Not nerves, not the familiar flutter before a hard sign sequence, but something steadier and stranger, like a gear finding a tooth it had been missing. Yes, I said. I'd be willing. Renata arrived at 5:20. I watched her register the people in the room one by one, her expression doing the rapid recalibration I'd seen once before. Renata, David Merrick said. Sit down, please. She sat. She looked at me, then at Warren, then back at David. I understand you met with Cora this afternoon, David said. I had a check-in, yes, she said. Standard intern coaching. She told me you described her as ungrateful, David said. A beat. I was addressing a pattern of behavior, Renata said. Going off script, not staying in her lane. This morning she left her work to intervene in the lobby, which isn't her role. She greeted our founder, David said, in his first language, something no one else in the building did. Renata looked at Warren. Warren didn't look away. I wasn't aware of who the visitor was, she said. That's not really the point, David said, the same word she'd used with me, same cadence, and I didn't know if he'd been briefed on the exact phrasing or if it was a coincidence. Either way, Renata heard it. The point is that an intern identified a need and met it, and you spent the afternoon convincing her that was a problem. I was managing the team's scope, Renata said. You told her to reflect on whether this was the right fit, David said. I'd like you to do the same thing. A silence opened in the room. Renata's hands were flat on the table. She looked at the org chart still visible on Warren's tablet. She's been here 4 weeks, Renata said quietly. Not an argument. More like something she needed to say out loud before she let it go. Yes, David said. She has. Warren signed something brief. The woman with the legal pad said, he says, 4 weeks was enough. I didn't gloat. I didn't let my face do anything I'd regret. Something that had been clenched somewhere behind my ribs since 2:30 that afternoon simply released, quietly, without announcement, the way a fist opens when it finally puts something down. I looked at Renata and I said, I hope the vendor's summary format is clear. I left notes on the shared drive for whoever takes it over. She didn't answer. David thanked her for her time. She stood and left. What happened in that room was that a man who'd built something lasting had spent a morning watching to see if what he'd built still deserved to last, and for 2 minutes in a lobby I had been his answer. That's what the org chart was. The cruelty of being called ungrateful for the very instinct that made me useful. I understood it later, in the elevator going down. Not justified, not explained, but visible. Renata had built her authority around scope and control because those were the metrics she'd been given. What I did that morning didn't fit. I didn't want to compress that understanding. I wanted to remember it at full size. 6 months after that Tuesday, I was sitting at a corner desk on the 14th floor of Harwick Logistics Group with a window I hadn't asked for and a title on my badge that still surprised me sometimes when I clipped it on in the morning. I had the ASL binder open in front of me. Tomas's handwriting in the margins, blue ballpoint, corrections and shortcuts accumulated over the years since he'd handed it to me in our parents' kitchen and said I'd need it more. I was working through the section on technical and professional vocabulary, building out a glossary for a new onboarding module I was developing for client-facing staff. The binder was held together by a rubber band now because the spiral had started pulling free from the top 3 pages. I hadn't replaced it. The rubber band was fine. A LinkedIn message had come in 2 weeks earlier from Renata. I hadn't read past the preview. Hi Cora, I've been thinking about our time working together and wanted to reach out. I left it unread. Not as a statement. Just because there was nothing in it I needed. Tomas had visited the week before and signed through the lobby with me after hours. Both of us moving through the empty space reading each other's hands in the overhead light, him pointing out everything I still did wrong with my elbow positioning. He'd met Warren briefly in the elevator, and they'd signed for 40 seconds while I watched, and Tomas had laughed at something I missed and refused to translate it for me. The binder's back cover had a coffee ring on it from a mug I'd set down without thinking in my second week here. I looked at it sometimes. A small imperfection in something I intended to keep. What I had learned, from my brother, from that lobby, from all the invisible work that disappears into the structure it holds up, is that the thing you do when no one is watching is the most accurate version of who you are. Not because someone will always see it. Sometimes no one does. But the doing of it shapes you whether or not it's witnessed, and the shape you become is what you bring into every room afterward. If this story found you at a moment when someone told you that your instincts were the problem, hold on to that binder. Keep the notes in the margins. The right room will recognize what you're carrying.